With us tonight, turn with me, if you will, to the book of Isaiah chapter 5. The book of Isaiah chapter 5. Just want to say I appreciate the opportunity to be able to stand again. I'm having a little difficulty with this thing up here. I'm not too used to preaching with one of these, but anyway, I appreciate the opportunity, and I made mention maybe some last Wednesday night. I knew about tonight that I was going to be filling in, but last Wednesday night was kind of a surprise. But I don't know what happened, but anyway, ended up preaching 2 weekends in a row. I hope y'all put up with me that many times. But anyway, Isaiah chapter 5, I want to provoke just some very simple thought this evening to try to be a blessing to us. Those of us that's saved, I want to look at this in two aspects tonight. And I want to start out on a church basis, as far as a church as a whole. And then I want to also relate it, if I can, to our personal spiritual walk with the Lord. And then I want to kind of, in the end, try to turn and look at it from an aspect as parents. And it kind of sounds complicated. I hope and pray that with the help of the Lord, I can tie it all together at the end with a burden that's on my heart. Isaiah chapter 5, I want to begin reading in verse 1. It says, "Now will I sing, my well-beloved, a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. My well-beloved hath a vineyard in a very fruitful hill. He fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof, and planted it with the choicest vine, and built a tower in the midst of it, and also made a winepress therein. And he looked, that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. Now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem, and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, betwixt me and my vineyard. What could have been done more to my vineyard, that I have not done in it? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, brought it forth wild grapes. Now go to, I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. Will take away the hedge thereof, it shall be eaten up. Break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. I will lay it waste, it shall not be pruned, nor digged. But there shall come up briars and thorns. Will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, but behold, oppression, for righteousness, but behold, a cry. Woe unto them that join house to house, that lay field to field, till there be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. In mine ears, said the Lord of hosts, of a truth, many houses shall be desolate, even great and fair, without inhabitant. Yea, 10 acres of vineyard shall yield one bath, and the seed of an homer shall yield an ephah." I'm going to stop reading there at verse 10. And I want to just look at, so like I said, just very simple thought here tonight. And if you look at this, even as what it's talking about here, you kind of have to look at it and kind of view through the way it's wrote to kind of see what's going on here. And to the best of my knowledge, I'm not going to say that I understand everything about it, but I do understand one thing about it here. If you look at it, he's talking about, when he talks about here to start with, he said, "Now will I sing to my well-beloved." I believe that that's the Lord here. And then he comes down and he talks about, he said, "A song of my beloved touching his vineyard." Now, if you look on down, if you look down to verse 7, and this is what I gather from this. It says, "For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel." So you have to look at this in the way of what it's wrote. You know, as he's talking about this vineyard, he calls it later that this is the house of Israel. So who is this? This is God's people, ain't it? You know, you look at it, you got to look at it this way. And I want us to think, and we got to kind of just look at this, and I want to try with the help of the Lord tonight to break it down a little bit to where maybe we can understand what he's saying here. Listen, he comes down, he says, "My well-beloved touching his vineyard." Now, I know I've read all this, but I want to kind of go through it real slowly and just make some comments about it as we go. He says, my beloved, touching his vineyard. So he's talking about his vineyard, and if you think about it, looking at verse 7, it's talking about Israel, about God's people. I want you to think about it this way. This vineyard that he is speaking of here is represents God's people. Listen, Israel, he says, my well-beloved hath a vineyard in a very fruitful hill. Very fruitful hill. Now, if you think about that, I believe that, and I want to try to just some way put it to where we can understand it, or where I can understand it. A lot of you are a lot smarter than I am. But I want you to think about it. He says here that they're in a very fruitful hill. If you're thinking about this in a vineyard or something, if we were trying to grow a vineyard or a garden, you would think, is this a good place, fertile ground, a place that, that's good for growing things. He says here, my beloved had a vineyard in a very fruitful hill. Now listen, here's some things. He's going to give some guidelines of what he had done to it. Now listen to me. Verse 2, he says, and he fenced it. So, sometimes, especially around here, what do we have to do to our gardens, vineyards, whatever you're trying to grow? We usually have to fence it, don't we? Why, something's going to come and going to hurt it, ain't it? Around here, the deer's going to take it over, ain't they? Every year I try to plant something. If I plant peas, the deer's going to get some of them. That's just going to happen. But he says here that he put a fence around it. He fenced it. He protected it. Okay, now think about this. Once again, you're thinking about this vineyard is, once again, God's people. That God protects us. And I want to relate it to us for just a minute. God puts a hedge about us, don't he? Listen, he comes down, he says, and he fenced it. Gathered out the stones thereof. Okay, so he's got the ground. He's prepared the ground, removed the stones to where it can be planted and to be useful. Listen, he says he planted it with the choicest vine. He put the best, didn't he? He gave it the best. He put the best in it, okay? And built a tower in the midst of it, a lookout, okay? And he says here, and also made a wine press therein. So he made the wine press was for the finished product, for what the grapes was going to bring, that they could finish the product and send it out to wherever it went, okay? So they're set up, ain't they? They're fenced in, they're protected. God's come and he's prepared everything and made everything just like it needs to be, okay? And he says that he even made the end product, the wine press, got them set up. They were ready. All they needed to do was produce grapes. Listen, and he looked, listen very carefully, that it should bring forth grapes. What does it sound like? Brother Tommy, it sounds to me like he was expecting some grapes, wasn't he? He was expecting some fruit for all that he had prepared, that he was expecting fruit. He looked that it was going, he expected it to make grapes. Okay? Listen to what it says, though. It says, and it brought forth wild grapes. If you look at this, I even tried to look up some of this because like I said, I still don't understand everything about it. But this is typical of sin, that if you look at this, and when he wanted grapes, which would have been good fruit, but here you got wild grapes, that's no good, that's not good for nothing. And listen, he comes down, in verse 3, he says, O now inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge I pray you betwixt me and my vineyard. So if you look at this, and I want to try to relate this to us this evening. Basically, if you look at this, and we're going to look at some of the things that God prepared for Israel here in just a minute. But he had them set up, didn't he? He had them set up just like they needed to be fruitful, didn't he? That in our life as a church, if you look at us, The Bible teaches that the gates of hell will never prevail against the church. That we're set up. God's got a hedge about us. That He's given us a place, a spot here in this community to be fruitful and to do His work and to have fruit, to bear fruit as a church. Also, I said I want to try to relate it on a personal basis. Where God's put us, each and every one of us, in whatever spot we're in life, whether it be a job, wherever we go from day to day, God's put us in you might want to call it like it says it here, Brother Joe Michael, a fruitful hill. A place to bear fruit, a place that God's promised, and we're going to look at this in a minute, that God has promised to help us to where we can bear fruit and be fruitful in His work, in His kingdom. Listen, He comes down here in verse 4, though. I want you to look at this, and I want you to, this hits me, and I've tried to preach along this line before, but this right here hits, and it hits home. It brought forth wild grapes. Wasn't productive, basically, is what you want to call it. Listen to verse 4. It says, what could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, brought it forth wild grapes. What more could have been done? That's what I want to ask us tonight. As God's people, as a church, what more could we be doing? What more can be done? Let's put it like that. A lot of times there's different situations in life that I know in my life I've looked back on when it was said and done, and I've asked myself the question what more could I have done in that situation to make it better? I want to ask us tonight, what more could we be doing? What more could we be doing? Here, these people here, that they had everything. They were set up just like they need to be. They were took care of. Still produced wild grapes. Not the kind of fruit it was supposed to be. What more could be done? What more could be done? Go with me to the book of Matthew for just a minute. Go to Matthew chapter 28. Matthew chapter 28. Read very familiar scripture here. And if you look at this, and we all know this is the Great Commission, and if you look at all the different gospel accounts, or in Mark, to be specific, it talks about that Jesus here, at this time, and we all know this, is fixing to be ascended back into heaven. And after He gets through telling them this in Mark's account, it says that He ascended. But anyway, listen, He comes down to verse 16. And He says, then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee, into a mountain where Jesus had appointed them. When they saw Him, they worshipped Him, but some doubted. Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, listen very carefully. I told you a while ago that God's promised to help us in His work, that He's given us what we need to be successful. Listen to what He says right here to these 11 disciples here. These people here, if you really want to think about it, God leaves them here with a commission. And from these 11 people, at some point, where did the gospel get to? Got to me and you, didn't it? Now listen to what it says here. It says, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. All power is given. All authority, everything that needs. He's sitting here saying, look, He said, I've got all the power, all the authority. Listen, He says, all power is given unto me in heaven and earth. And then He gives them the charge, or gives them the commission. He says, to go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. He says, lo, I'm with you always. Okay, if He's with us always, and He mentions to them first that, look, He says, I got all power, all the authority is given to me. He's capable of helping us, ain't He? He's got all the power, and He says He's going to always be with us if we stay in the center of His will and do the things that we should do, that He's going to be there with us. Listen, I want to go, at this time, I want to go and look at something else. Try to look at it a different way. Go back to the book of Numbers. Book of Numbers, chapter 13. Book of Numbers, chapter 13. I said I wanted to touch on just a little bit about parents. I guess if you really want to look at it, it goes for just people that's not parents as well. Just God's people in general. You know, not listening, not believing, doubting God. Listen, God has given us everything we need to be fruitful. And also, and I'm gonna, like I said, I'm going to deal with the parents for a little while too. God's given us children. I got some of my own. A lot of you have them. God's given us everything we need to raise them in a way that's pleasing unto Him as well. He's given us everything we need. All power is given unto Him, right? Listen to what it says here. I want us to look at something here in the book of Numbers and try to tie all this up together at the end. Verse 1 of Numbers chapter 13. Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Send thou men, that they may search the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel. Of every tribe of their fathers shall ye send a man, every one a ruler among them. And he says, verse 3, And Moses, by the commandment of the Lord, sent them from the wilderness of Paran. All those men were heads of the children of Israel. Now, I want you to think about something for just a minute. Y'all all know this account. This is where that they would go spy out the land of Canaan before they would go in. Listen, I want you to think about something that's mentioned here. In verse 2 it says, Send thou men, that they may search the land of Canaan. Now, notice who, though. Listen, it says, Which I give unto the children of Israel, of every tribe of their fathers shall ye send a man, every one a ruler among them. So at this point, you know, the different tribes of Israel, you know, they all spawned from different families. But listen to what it says here. Every one a ruler among them. So these is someone that's in the head of the tribe, ain't they? Someone that represents, you know, it says of their father. Okay, so listen, you know, I'm not going to go through and read all these because I'd mispronounce about half of them, but it talks about, you know, like verse 6, it says of the tribe of Judah, Caleb the son of Jephunneh. You know, he goes through and he picks one from every tribe, one that's a leader, one that's a head of every tribe. You know, and I want us to think about something tonight, you know, fathers, that we sit here, that as we're leaders of our family, ain't we? You know, these here, they're tribes, you know, but like I said, a lot of them's family. But listen, you come down here, and they go and they spy out this land. I'm going to just kind of go through some of this. Not going to take a lot of time to read it. But they go and they spy out this land, and they look at it. You know, and God's done gave them a promise of what it was going to be like, hadn't He? You know, He told them that it was going to be a land that floweth with milk and honey. And I believe in Exodus chapter 3, you can go back, where God plainly tells them that He's going to give them the land. But here these men, they go and they look, they spy it out, you know, they check it out real good. They come back with some examples of some of the fruit that's in the land, you know. It's really, and they get to the point, they come back, they said, look, it's real good land, just like God said. They didn't say that part, but it's real good land. It's fat. Here's a tag of grapes we brought back. It's real good land. Then there was a but, wasn't there? You come down to verse 31. Numbers chapter 13. Verse 31, it says, But the men that went up with him said, We be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. You know, what do you see here? You You know, even with the promise of God that, look, I'm going to give you this land that floweth with milk and honey, that it's going to be yours, what do they say? We can't do this. You know, that they were given the opportunity. It was theirs for the taking. Unbelief. Listen, it said, and they brought, verse 32, and they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the giants, the son of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. So here they come back, and basically they just say, we can't take it. We can't take the land. You know, even though that God's provided, He's made the way, He's going to make the way, they just don't believe Him. Okay, you come down into chapter 14, and I want to look at some of the things mentioned here. It says, you know, that in that night, or verse 14, or chapter 14, verse 1 says, and all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. All the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, and the whole congregation said unto him, would God we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in this wilderness. They go on and they just complain. And you come on down here, and old Caleb, you know, that he would stand up and he'd say, look, he said, we can do this. And basically he says, if God's with us, and he was definitely with him, they could take the land. So we're going to skip some of that. Basically, you know, that Caleb comes and he says, look, he said, we can take the land. But you come down here and come down to verse, let's start at verse 15. No, verse 14. It says here, and it says, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land, for they have heard that the Lord art among this people, that the Lord art seen face to face, and that thy cloud standeth over them, and that thou goest before them by daytime in a pillar of a cloud, and a pillar of fire by night. Now if thou shalt kill all this people as one man, then the nations which have heard the fame of thee will speak, saying, because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land which He sware unto them, therefore He hath slain them in the wilderness. So basically what's happening here is God's had enough. You know, at this point, you know, that they've rebelled enough. Israel's, you know, He mentions down here later, and we may read it in a minute, but He mentions that they these 10 times that they despised Him. But listen, He comes down here in verse 18, or verse 17, listen. He says, and now I beseech thee, let the power of the Lord be great, according as thou hast spoken, saying, the Lord is long-suffering and of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. So what God's ready to destroy all these people. Basically, Moses just pleading with God here, you know, and trying to get him to forgive them. Now let's skip down a few verses here. Go on down to verse 26 for the sake of time. God's fixing to hand out punishment. He's fixing to tell them, look, this is what's going to happen. And I didn't go through all of it back in Isaiah. We may go look at it again before we close tonight. Now, I know we will, but anyway, sit here, verse 26, it says, and the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation which murmur against me? Have I heard the murmurings of the children of Israel, which they murmur against me? Say unto them, as truly as I live, saith the Lord, as ye have spoken in mine ears, so will I do to you. Your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and all that were numbered of you, according to the whole number, from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured against me. Doubtless ye shall not come into the land concerning which I swear to make you dwell therein, save Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. But your little ones, which you said should be a prey, them will I bring in. They shall know the land which ye have despised or rejected. Listen, verse 32, it says, but as for you, your carcasses, they shall fall in this wilderness. Now, I want you to listen to this, because our vineyard story ends a lot like this one did. But I want you to listen to what it says here in verse 33. It says, and your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years and bear your whoredoms until your carcasses be wasted in the wilderness. So these men, I want you to think about something for just a minute. I want to just kind of go through a little quick rundown of it. God comes to Moses, children's in Egyptian bondage. He tells him, look, I want you to lead the people out. I want you to lead them out, speaks to him in the burning bush, tells them he's going to give them this land, which floweth with milk and honey. They leave the land of Egypt. Not very long after they leave, where do they come? We're not going to go through all of it for sake of time. They come to the Red Sea, don't they? Look, Pharaoh's army is following them. What'd they do? Began to murmur and complain, didn't they? What'd they say? Would God we died back in Egypt. Let us go back. Basically, let us go back and be slaves again under Pharaoh. Here they come. God's prepared the way for them. He has planned this. He told them He was going to give them this land. Once again, they disobeyed. They don't believe. Lack of faith. They won't go in there. Too hard. It's too hard. So these 11 men, or these 12 men that went, searched the land out, how many of them's going in the promised land? 2 of them, ain't they? There's 2 of them going in there. What does it say? It says save Caleb and Joshua, right? They going to go. The rest of them, what? 20 and up, what's going to happen? Going to fall dead in the wilderness, ain't they? But now listen. Listen to what it says here. Because of these men, because of the decision they made, because they did not follow the Lord, they did not listen, they did not believe, listen to what's going to happen. Let's read it again. It says, and your children shall wander in the wilderness. Wander. What are they going to be doing while they're wandering? Wasting time, ain't they? Just wandering around. Not going nowhere. There's no point to it. Listen, it says, wander in the wilderness 40 years and bear your whoredoms until your carcasses be wasted in the wilderness. Listen, it says, verse 34, after the number of the days in which you search the land, even 40 days, each day for a year, shall you bear your iniquities, even 40 years, and you shall know my breach of promise. I, the Lord, have said, I will surely do it unto all this evil congregation that are gathered together against me in the wilderness. They shall be consumed. There they shall die. I want to go look at something else here. Go with me to the book of Joshua for just a minute. Book of Joshua, chapter 24. At this point, we all know that the children of Israel, they've been in the promised land by now. Joshua led them in there. And we know that Joshua was one that, that God said on that day that he was going to make it, that he was going to be in the promised land. I want you to listen to some things that's mentioned here. And as I read it, and as we look at it, I want you to go back and think about what we read in Isaiah. How that it was prepared. Just like it ought to be, that God He just laid it out for them. Give them the easy road. Listen, come down Joshua, let's start in verse 14. No, let's start in verse 8. Excuse me. Joshua chapter 24, verse 8. Listen. It says, and I brought you into the land of the Amorites, which dwelt on the other side of Jordan. They fought with you, and I gave them into your hand, that you may possess their land. And I destroyed them from before you, Then Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, arose and warred against Israel, and sent and called Balaam, the son of Beor, to curse you. But I would not hearken unto Balaam. Therefore he blessed you still, so I delivered you out of his hand. And you went over Jordan, and came unto Jericho, and the men of Jericho fought against you, the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Canaanites, and the Hittites, Girgashites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I delivered them into your hand. I sent the hornet before you, drave them out from before you, even the 2 kings of the Amorites, but not with thy sword, nor with thy bow. Now you think about what's going on here. Joshua, late in his life, is addressing the elders of Israel here, and he's going back through some things, and he's telling them some things that God had done for them down through the time, even in him leading them, and even before that. Listen, come down to verse 13. Listen to this verse right here. It says, and I have given you a land. Okay? He says, I've given you a land for which you did not labor. So basically he says, look, he says, you didn't work for this. You didn't do nothing for this. No labor. Listen, and cities which you built not. And had to build the cities, all this prepared for them. Listen, and you dwell in them. Okay? And the vineyards and the olive yards which you planted not, do you eat. God's prepared. He's made it easy for them. He made it easy for them. Listen, I want you to think about something for just a minute. As a church, you say, well, Nathan, it's not easy to do the work of the Lord in the world we live in today. Under our own power, it's not. It's not easy to do under our own power. But with God's help, the children of Israel here, they got this land, and some of them didn't get to go in there. They could have, though, if they would have chose to just simply put faith in the Lord and let Him do what He said He would do. Listen, God said He's going to be with us always, didn't He? In this work, in the commission that He's given us, as a church on our individual basis, in our daily walk with the Lord, in life, in the different places we go. As parents, God has told us that there's instruction in here, and He's told us if we trust Him and give them to Him, He would help us. Listen, He's made it easy. Made it easy for Israel here. Listen, gave them a land they didn't have to work for. Cities they didn't have to build. They ate of something they didn't even plant. Listen, come down. It says, verse 14. So here's our part. This is what we need to do. This is what Joshua is trying to tell the children of Israel here, that needs to be on your behalf, what you need to do. Listen, it says, now therefore, fear the Lord. Serve Him in sincerity and in truth. Put away the gods which your father served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt, and serve you the Lord. So get serious about serving the Lord. Get serious about doing His work, what He'd have us to do. He's with us. He's prepared the way for us. Listen, verse 15, He says, and if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve. We've got to make a choice, don't we? Whether we're going to work or whether we're not going to. Listen, He says, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, the gods of the Amorites, in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. He says, for Him and His house, His household. He said, we're going to serve the Lord. Go back to Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 5. We need to serve the Lord. He's made the way for us. Listen, He's prepared it. We just need to trust and obey, don't we? Listen. Verse 5, what does He say? He says, now go to, I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof. Church, we don't want that. Revelation's writer talks about that he removed the candlestick. We don't want that to happen. Listen, he said, I will take away the hedge thereof. It shall be eaten up. Those deer are going to come in and get it, ain't they? Listen. And it shall be eaten up, and break down the wall thereof shall be trodden. I will lay it waste. It shall not be pruned nor digged. There shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. What more could have been done? This vineyard's fixing to struggle, ain't they? It's fixing to struggle. Why? It's not going to have no nourishment. He said there's no rain going to fall upon it. It's going to take away the hedge about it. There's no protection. And no digging, no pruning, no tending to it. It's going to be in trouble, ain't it? Listen, he comes down, he says, for the vineyard of the Lord of the host is the house of Israel, men of Judah, his pleasant plant. He looked for judgment, but behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry. He said here, he said, look, he said, this vineyard, the house of Israel, God's people. He said, look, it don't sound like he was pleased with them. May I ask us tonight, one more time, what more can we do? God's prepared a way for us to live for him, to do the things that he would have us to do. He's laid it out there for us. He's promised to help us. Can we do more with what he's given us while we sing?